Hi,
Hello.
how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing all right.
Good.
Oh, okay, I'm on my
What
class.
about you?
I'm good. Good.
I gotta go. I'm on my class. So,
Yep, all right, well, I love you.
Hi,
Have a good
Hi,
day.
how are you?
bye.
I'm eating spaghetti.
I understand.
Oh, I just realized this week's my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
What day?
The 4th.
Okay.
Oh, mine is the 3rd. Happy birthday.
Oh, happy early birthday.
Thanks.
When is it Super Bowl? When is the 4th? I don't know when the 4th is. No, okay, it's not on Super Bowl. Does anyone know who's playing in the Super Bowl this year?
I thought it was Kansas and maybe someone else, but I don't watch. I think it's Kansas.
Rams won last night, so I don't know if they're going or not.
Rams and Bengals.
Rams and
If
Bengals.
somebody knows who are the Bengals?
Well, they're the ones with the pretty helmets that look like tigers. The helmets have stripes like a tiger, orange,
Who
and
do they play for?
Cincinnati.
Okay.
Oh. That's different.
I don't like I've probably said I get my news from Facebook and I just see who goes for who based on how excited they get.
I'm surprised Tom Brady's not in the Super Bowl. He's always in the Super Bowl every year.
I know. I'm glad he's not. I'm kind of tired of him.
He's actually really nice. Like met him before. Like I met him in Gazelle because I used to live in Massachusetts, and Giselle used to come to my gas station all the time. Nicest lady in the world. You would never expect it.
Oh,
Wow.
The fact that you like football still freaks me out.
Hey, I didn't.
Bye.
I didn't used to, but I know in the last couple of years I've been watching it pretty faithfully.
I just don't get it. Like I can watch basketball and I can watch baseball, but I don't get football.
I am with you. I don't get it. I don't get it.
It's boring, and because I just don't cheer when everyone else cheers because even if they don't get any
The
points,
butts.
something's happening.
I just watch football to look at the butts of the guys. That's all.
Well, that you know what? I understand that.
See, Justin, there is a reason I watch.
That it makes sense now. It makes total sense now.
There's a kid I graduated high school with. He plays for New Orleans
Okay.
Saints now, and he's like one of those. He's on the starting team now, and he's like always like posting like stuff, and it's like really interesting to see like behind the scenes because he
Right.
has his professional Instagram, which is like for like the general public, and then he has his private Instagram. And I'm on his private Instagram, and I see like the real behind the scenes and not the aesthetic. It's like really cool.
Huh. No, I had a friend who played for the NBA for a little while, and that's how I got involved in basketball. I liked it before then, but I got into it then. And so we'll see. I think I could still get into it again if I sit down and actually watch, which I just don't do anymore.
My husband's from India, and so he likes to watch cricket.
Okay.
And he's been trying to get me into watching cricket, and I'm just like, this is really boring.
What's that? No, cricket. What's that compared to here in the States?
I think it's kind of like baseball almost, except instead of having the 3 bases, they have the 2 bases, and you have to hit the ball like I think it's like as far as you can.
Oh.
Or like I don't really know how it works, But all I know is that the matches, they last for like 6 hours.
Wow.
They last for days. Like he just got done watching the India and Pakistan match, and that took about 2.5 days.
Oh,
Not
wow.
straight playing, but like I mean, they had breaks in between.
So it's kind of like Harry Potter and watching these games that could go on for days.
It can
Okay.
go on for days.
All right. Well, are there any questions or concerns? Let's jump into this.
I did have
Go
trouble.
ahead.
I had sent you actually a text with some videos. It wouldn't let me.
Jen, I thought I saw yours and then I didn't see it because I think I have a student with your same last name in another class.
Oh, okay.
And so I thought it was an email and I could not remember. You sent it to me. Was it last night?
Yes.
Okay. What did it say? What was going on?
It was just the last few questions when you had to drag the answers to the boxes to drop them in. And I
Okay.
took videos of it. It wouldn't allow me. I tried exiting out, going back in. and
When
it
that
just-
happens, call McGraw-Hill
Okay.
because chances are they're going to be able to do something faster than I will.
Okay.
And I wouldn't know why it wasn't allowing you to do it. If it especially if it was just answering one of the questions.
Yeah, it was the last few, like I didn't have trouble with all of the quiz except for those. And I took a video of each question. I was like, I know the answers, but it wouldn't let me drag it over. It just kept giving me a red circle, like no, and declining it. Like it kept going back to the main place, but
Well, I don't know
I
why.
don't know. I don't know.
I had that issue too, and you have to like get it over to like a certain part of like, I don't know, the wording or the sentence, but it took me like a bunch of tries too. I struggled.
Okay.
It was also a strange way to drag and drop. It wasn't actually drag and drop like you normally do, like holding your mouse down. You had to click it, and then that was like selecting it, and then you placed it where you wanted it. So I don't know if that would resolve it, but
Maybe because I have a touch screen, so maybe I'll have to connect my mouse next time. Thank you.
or just touch it one time and then, instead of dragging it. 'Cause
Okay.
it wasn't a true drag and drop. It was weird.
And Samantha says in the chat, she had to drop it on the yellow dots for it to drop it.
Somebody blowing a horn at me?
Say it again.
Nothing. I wasn't talking to you. I'm sorry.
All right. No, it's all right. Okay. Let's jump into this. So I want to finish chapter 1 tonight and get a good jump on chapter 2. Somebody in our class has COVID. I'll find out. Somebody, it's most likely this class if they're texting me right now.
Hi, Professor. It's Emily Worster. I'm the one with COVID. I just sent
Oh,
you. an
lucky
email.
you. Okay, I wasn't gonna say anything. I wasn't gonna say who it was.
Oh, I thought you might. I thought
Oh,
you were.
no, I
looking, so
wouldn't,
just-
no. That's actually that's kind of a FERPA violation.
Oh, okay. Well,
I wouldn't do that.
it's okay. I'm the one with COVID, but I'm in class today.
Okay, all right. Get feeling better because that's scary stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying.
Okay. No, I wouldn't say unless you mentioned it like you did just now, I wouldn't put a name to it. No, you'll know that if you ever, you've heard my mom and you've probably seen my mom interact with us. Unless you tell her your name, I don't tell her your names. If I'm gonna tell her about an adventure I'm having with a student, I put in a fake name. So yeah, FERPA's kind of a big deal. And then if it's something that's going on between you and me, and she said she doesn't remember any of your names anyway. But if it's something that is significant, I'd still use a fake name because it's kind of a big deal.
I didn't realize FERPA would cover that. I thought it just covered like student records and stuff like that.
No, it covers you. I've learned, I've seen some professors do some inappropriate things and learn later that, in my grad school adventures, watching professors do inappropriate things and learn from that experience that those are FERPA violations. Anything that one student relating to another student, or an instructor talking about another student out in public with another professor and using that student's name. It's all right if you both know who it is, as long as you don't use any identifying things like their name or what classes they're in or anything to that effect. But the second you do that, it's a FERPA violation. I would think it's similar to a HIPAA thing. You just don't use it. Like my mom just said exactly.
Oh, okay. Today I learned.
So we talked about the basic properties of all life. So there's an organization, there's a cellular composition, metabolism, meaning that energy comes in and energy goes out. Responsiveness, grabbing the wrong end of the curling iron, you learn how responsive we are to our environment. Movement, homeostasis, we'll talk about that in 1 second, what that is. Development, meaning differentiation and growth. Reproduction and evolution. And recognize that life is not a single property, but a collection of properties. And remember this hierarchy of complexity back here, reviewing just for a minute, hierarchy of complexity. You start with atoms, you move to molecules. Molecules start interacting to form macromolecules. Macromolecules interact to form organelles. Cells are the interactions of organelles. Cells are the tissues are the interaction of cells. The interaction of tissues is what results in organs. So every time, as you move up this complex hierarchy of complexity, you see emergent properties come out that were not there before. DNA by itself, for example, this macromolecule here, DNA by itself is not able to do a lot, but within an organelle where it's interacting with other macromolecules, that's when you form new organelles. So with every step in this ladder, you see different properties emerging that were not there before. So when we look at life, life is an organized hierarchy of new emergent properties coming out that weren't there before. So cells are able, okay, let's start right here. Cells are able to transport materials from one region of the cell to another, just as the body is able to transport substances to different locations, or skeletal muscles working with your skeleton can transport you from the sofa to the refrigerator. What basic life process is illustrated by this description?
Movement.
Movement.
It's movement. If you think all of that, all of these things, being able to transport things from one place to another, this is all movement. If you think about it, and you think about cells shifting to and differentiation or organelles moving, that's also movement, but let's not think of it that deeply. Metabolism is moving a substance from one place to another. And you'll learn more about metabolism next semester when you take 122. But for right now, let's just think of this as movement. We could also define metabolism another way, and we will later. So homeostasis, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here, or zoom in just a little bit. Zoom out, that's zoom out. Okay. Homeostasis is the ability to detect change, activate mechanisms that oppose it, and thereby maintain relatively stable internal conditions. I'm going to give you another definition for it that I like better. Being able to maintain a stable internal environment within narrow limits, within a narrow range of limits. I know I don't type very fast, so if you're writing this down, you could probably write it down fast, just as fast. Range of limits or boundaries, despite changes in the external environment. And I like to think of this is your protective mechanism. This is the idea. One major example, I still like grabbing the wrong end of the curling iron. You grab the wrong end of the curling iron, and before it destroys and gives you third-degree burns because you're still holding on to it, you've let it go. So it's a protective mechanism. In a lot of ways. It's not always that drastic, but it's maintaining, being able to respond to your environment. Your external environment changes your internal environment. Temperature goes up. Think of it that way. The temperature goes up. What do you start to do when the temperature starts going up where you are at?
You start sweating
You start sweating. Why do you start sweating?
so it can cool off your internal body temperature.
Right. Your body temperature needs to stay within a narrow limit. Let's say 98. Mom, what's your normal temp? She's been dealing with an illness. What? 98.6. Okay, so normal body temp 98.6. You go between, your narrow range is between 98.5 and 98.7. You go outside in the middle of the summer, you go outside and all of a sudden you start sweating. It's one of those really hot days where it's about 100 degrees. We here in Pennsylvania, we don't normally get that hot, but it gets really warm. So let's say it's like 98. And like Kara said, you start to sweat because your body temp has now gone up beyond 98.7. It's like 98.8. You haven't gone significantly, but your body has to maintain a narrow range. Enzymes work best at within a narrow range temp. The reason your body temp is the way it is because enzymes, your optimal enzymes work best then. So then you're out in the heat, you start to sweat, and you walk into a store and they have the air conditioning and it's just blowing on you. And what happens at that point?
You get cold.
Yeah, if you're like me and Marissa, you start to freeze. And so all of a sudden you've got muscles that are attached to the hairs in your skin, and they start to contract. We'll talk about those in 2 weeks, exactly what they're called in lab, but they're called erector pili muscles. They start to contract because through breaking up ATP, remember what I think we talked about ATP. ATP is the energy currency for the cell. ATP, they start to break down ATP to generate heat and bring your temperature back. So you're always working within a narrow range and keeping your body and your internal environment within a very narrow range, despite changes in the external environment. Is that clear what homeostasis is? Okay. And we'll see examples of it. We'll see lots of examples of it, actually. So here's an example. This just goes on in your house. Where does it start? Room temperature falls to 19 degrees Celsius or 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, your thermostat activates, because that's too low of a temp. It activates the furnace. You get a heat output. The room temperature rises to 20 degrees Celsius. The thermostat shuts off the furnace and the room cools down. And then it starts all over again. These mechanisms that work to oppose are feedback mechanisms that are going to alter the original changes that trigger them. Therefore, they're called feedback loops. So what is the definition of homeostasis?
It's D.
The ability to maintain relatively stable internal conditions, even though the outside world changes. Do we all agree with David on that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me give you a hint. I'll say something. When you take the chapter quizzes, have you seen any of these questions that we go through?
Yes.
Okay, realize that I'm getting them all from the same source. So what I'm essentially trying to do, with these questions, I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to find out what you know and what you don't know, and what's not clear and what's clear in your heads. And I'm also trying to get you thinking in a way that you'll do well in the class. Giving you some practice as to what you have to know to do well in the class. So components involved in a feedback loops. There's 5, depending on who tells you the components, there's 3 or 5. Let's go with right now there being 5. The first one is that we get a stimulus that produces, like a temperature. We get a stimulus that causes a change in a variable. I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit more. A change in a variable. This change is detected by a receptor. This receptor or sensor sends this information to a control center. The control center sends a signal to an effector. Well, actually, let me back up. The control center decides what to do or whether to do anything. Are we going to do anything about it? And if we are going to do something about it, what are we going to do? It sends a signal to an effector, and the effector carries out whatever the control center decided to do. And so the first variable or the first part, let's see, first component is a stimulus that changes. It's the change that's occurred, or stimulus that causes a change. The receptor that senses a change, the control center that makes a decision about what we're going to do, the effector that carries out the change, whatever we decide we're going, or the mechanism of action, whatever the control center decides we're going to do is carried out by the effector. And the response is the 5th one. So we have a variable, it gets changed, it causes things to move out of balance. That move out of balance is sensed by a receptor. The receptor sends a signal to the control center. Control center decides if we're going to, what are we going to do if we're going to do anything about it? And if we're going to do something about it, what should we do? And the effector carries out that mechanism. And the response is whatever's left. Questions about how this works? Control center oftentimes is the nervous system, but we'll learn that not all things have to involve the nervous system. So most often we think of the control center as being your brain and your spinal cord. And not all things have to involve the brain and spinal cord. So an example, we kind of talked about this a minute before, but your body temperature rises up to 99.5. Your vessels start to vasoconstrict or excuse me, vasodilate to release heat from your body. Keep your internal core from going up too high. Your vessel, your external vessels in your periphery vasodilate to release heat. And then at below 98.6, those vessels constrict to bring up the heat again in your core and prevent loss of more heat. And then you go up again and you vasodilate to release heat. Questions? And your receptor here, the triggers or the components of the feedback loop. The stimulus is heat. The change or the other thing that we could say the stimulus is temperature. You have thermal receptors that sense that the temperature has gone up. It sends a signal to the control center, your nervous system, which sends a signal out to those erector pili muscles and vessels that are going to be involved in dilating your blood vessels. And the vessels dilate, releasing heat until your temperature gets too low again. And then it sends a signal back saying, okay, well, now the temperature is too low. And those vessels in your periphery start to constrict again. So it's a constant process. It's constantly occurring. It's a continual process where it's always occurring because you can't stay within that narrow range. Where you can't always stay, let me say it different, you can't. You're always going to stay within that narrow range. Your body is always working to get you back within that narrow range, despite the fact that you're constantly in a changing outer environment. Another type, stimulus. Someone rises from bed, and you felt this when you've gotten a step. Excuse me, cannot talk tonight. When you have stood up too fast. Well, hopefully you don't pass out before this happens, but the blood drains from the upper body, creating an imbalance in the blood proportions. You have baroreceptors. I don't know if we talked about this before. What are baroreceptors? What does baro mean? I don't think we did.
Like pressure, like they detect pressure.
Yep. So these are baroreceptors, or receptors that detect pressure. So we have them in the aortic arch right here. You see where that little yellow star is? Aortic arch right here, and in the internal carotid arteries. And so they detect when all of a sudden the pressure has dropped. And they send a signal to the integrating center or the control center. It's called both, the integrating center or the control center. And it sends a signal out to the heart, telling the heart to accelerate its contracting rhythm. And then the blood pressure rises to normal. whenever within this, I want you to be able to detect the, excuse me, the parts of the feedback loop. So the stimulus, the receptor, the integrating center, the effector, and the response. So these, what you've seen so far are all what we call negative feedback loops. And what that means is that it's maintaining homeostasis. These are all, we have different, so we're going to talk about positive feedback loops, but these are negative because we're always moving back to the range we were in before. The normal range, the range where we want to be, that small range that our body is most stable in, we're always moving back to it. So we have two regulating systems. So I said that the nervous system was one of the main ones. Another system that's a major one involved in whole systemic regulation is the endocrine system. So the nervous system works by sending nerve impulses via action potentials. And we'll talk about action potentials about the middle of the semester. But it's sending nervous impulses. And it causes rapid changes immediately. This is where you grab the wrong end of the curling iron and you drop it before you even realize that you've been hurt. It's very rapid. But it doesn't last very long. It goes away fairly quickly. Endocrine system works through secreting hormones from glands into the blood, and then those hormones circulate and move around until they reach the target organ that has a receptor that can bind those hormones. So these tend to act more slowly, but they last longer. Because the only way to stop the endocrine system and the hormones is for the hormones to get broken down or used up. Nerve impulses are just like electric wires. It happens very quickly. So these systems can act together or they can act independently of one another. But they're both involved in feedback mechanisms. So I told you that the examples of feedback loops we talked about first were negative feedback loops. Here's a positive feedback loop. Labor and delivery. The uterus starts to contract when it's getting ready to expel the developed baby or newborn. And the muscles start to contract and the head of the fetus pushes against the cervix. When you have mechanoreceptors, mechano meaning mechanical, you have mechanoreceptors that are in the cervix that sense that stretch. And they send a signal to the brain, to an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland in the brain, and it tells it to secrete oxytocin. The pituitary gland releases oxytocin, and oxytocin, when this hormone goes around, circulates around, and when it reaches the uterus, it causes the uterus to contract even more. And the result is that the head of the baby pushes harder against the cervix. And so now the mechanoreceptors are firing even more. So they send another signal to the hypothalamus. And it sends a signal to the pituitary gland, and we secrete more oxytocin. And that oxytocin circulates around, comes down to the uterus, and causes the uterus to contract even more. And this keeps occurring until the baby is out. So it keeps occurring until the stimulus that started the loop, the baby's head here, or the pressure within the cervix, stops. When this signal goes away here, it stops. And it goes back to normal right afterwards. So rather than, bear with me here. Let's say, I like to think of it this way. We have a narrow range here, and it can be pressure, it can be temperature, it can be volume, but we have a narrow range here. Here's one limit, here's the next limit. If it's a negative feedback loop, what that means is that we start somewhere in here. And if it's a negative feedback loop, we start moving just based on the fact that there's changes in our external environment, go out like this, and the negative feedback loop, the mechanism occurs and we get pushed back in. So we're back within the narrow limits. If it's a net positive feedback loop, the change occurs, we get pushed out, and we keep moving out until the change that started us goes away. We keep, here's our limits, and we keep moving out of those limits until the change, the stimulus that started goes away, and then it comes back. But we're going to keep moving out until that stimulus goes away. An example, and you know that I teach 122 at the same time I teach this class. So this is an example, and I'm going to keep it simple. But inflammation. You get something, you get a cut on your foot. And now the barrier that prevents your body from infection has been penetrated. Your secure perimeter has been penetrated, and bacteria has come in and started entering your foot. Until those bacteria are cleared out, the inflammatory pathway is going to continue. And it's going to continue and continue and continue until the bacteria and the infection are cleaned up. So that's another example of a positive feedback loop. Are there questions about these negative versus positive feedback loops? Because this idea of homeostasis and negative and positive feedback loops are the basis of anatomy and physiology. A lot of times I'll ask you if there's any questions, and then I don't pause for very long. So I'm pausing for a second here. See if there's any questions. See if there's anything in chat. And I figure out what I'm doing with chat. Not that either. Another example, please. Did that, what's another example? Do you want an example of a negative feedback loop or positive feedback loop?
Oh, positive feedback loops.
Oh, go. There aren't as many. Almost most of the feedback loops are negative. Let me think. Shoot, what's another one? I don't know if this is a real feedback loop or not, but there's food in your stomach. You just swallowed something. There's food in your stomach. And that's the trigger. Now a signal goes, there's sensors in your stomach that are going to sense when there's something there. So the response gets sent to it's actually the enteric nervous system. It's a special type of nervous system. And it says to the stomach to secrete hydrochloric acid, which activates enzymes in your stomach to break things down in your stomach. And this activation keeps occurring. You keep secreting hydrochloric acid until the food gets moved into the small intestines or it's mixed completely. And once the food has moved down to the small intestines, then it stops. Does that help? When we run into more positive feedback loops, I will show them to you, but I can't really, we just don't have a lot of them. They tend to be more negative than positive. What's one that isn't a good one that you've all seen people do? Everyone has seen some parent do this in the grocery store, shouting at a toddler because they're screaming. For some reason, it never really stops the screaming. It just kind of amplifies. So that's another, that's another positive feedback loop. So do you see the components of the feedback loop in this positive feedback loop? What's the trigger?
The head hitting the cervix.
The head hitting the cervix. And so it's stimulating the pressure. What's sensing it? And I didn't write this down. So these are the mechanoreceptors. What's the next part of the loop?
The nerve impulses.
The nerve impulse. It's going to the brain, to the hypothalamus. And that's your integration center or your control center. What occurs next? What's the next component?
The brain stimulates the pituitary gland.
So the brain stimulates the pituitary gland, and what happens after that, Samantha?
It starts to secrete oxytocin.
Starts to secrete oxytocin. And what happens after that? Someone else.
Oxytocin stimulates even more contractions and pushes the fetus towards the cervix to continue the loop.
Right. Now, with Dee asking me for another example, I honestly, my brain is, I wish I would think of these examples more often than I do, because I just went over this one in another class. Here's another positive feedback loop for you. There's a tear or a break in the blood vessel wall, and blood starts moving out through the vessel. In that blood, there are platelets. Platelets start to adhere to the site. They get activated by components within the wall, collagen fibers within the wall. And they start to get sticky and they release chemicals. As they release more chemicals, more platelets are activated, and those platelets become more sticky. And eventually we develop a platelet plug. And this loop keeps happening until there's no longer blood flowing through the vessel wall. Do you see the components of the loop there? The feedback loop again? Even if you don't know all those terms, you can see the components. There's a tear in the vessel wall. And this is not the nervous system. This is one where the nervous system is not part of it. The endocrine system is not part of it. It's the platelets that are deciding what to do. So they're your integrating center. They release chemicals. That's the mechanism of action. And the platelet plug forms. And until the blood stops circulating, coming out of the wound, this is going to continue, and more platelets are going to get activated. So the response is actually, the response is that the platelets get activated and release more chemicals. And eventually this plug will get tight enough that there's no more blood leaking out through the vessel. But until that occurs, platelets are going to get sticky and get activated, and more are going to get activated until there's no more blood leaking out of the wall. Questions? Which of the following is an example of a negative feedback system?
Would it be E?
E. Let me see. Well, I have to read them. Give me 1 second. Welcome to my reality. Decrease in blood pressure and heart function during severe blood loss. E is correct. You're right. Good job, Elizabeth. Do you see that? Midway through a 5-mile workout, a runner begins to sweat profusely. The sweat glands producing the sweat would be considered which part of the feedback loop?
Effector.
The effector.
I have a question.
Yep.
So in that previous question, that previous multiple choice question,
this one,
yeah, the scenario B, how does your how does your heart differentiate the decrease in blood pressure from, standing up versus severe blood loss?
How do I? It's, you know what it's trying to do is, David, I thought that was one of those that's right on the edge. And of course you have to bring it up. Why is the following, well, essentially I think what you're asking, David, my mom's like, what's he asking? How would a decrease in blood pressure and heart function during severe blood loss be a negative feedback loop? Or is it actually positive? Okay, Mom, come up with a good answer.
Okay, you've got exsanguination, right?
Exsanguination meaning loss of blood flow. Okay.
Severe.
Okay, you guys, you got to talk a little louder, Mom. You're being really quiet over there. You don't have to come over if you don't want to, but you can talk a little louder.
So we're talking severe blood loss and increased heart rate. Correct?
Yes. Oh, no, decreased heart rate.
You don't get decreased heart
You
rate.
don't get decreased heart rate, do you?
No.
No.
Tachycardia equals hypovolemia. There's a direct
Shoot, I
link.
knew that didn't sound right.
Well, isn't tachycardia considered normal in like athletic adults?
It is, but not, when there's a severe blood loss, it's still positive feedback loop. When there's a severe blood loss, there's a drop. Let me finish what I was. Give me 1 second here. I'm trying to think through my answer because I haven't explained this in a while. When there's a severe blood loss, what that does is that means that there's less, the blood volume has dropped, right? You start with 5 liters of blood. Now you're maybe at 4. What that does is it drops your blood pressure, kind of like water running through a hose. So all of a sudden you've gone down to a trickle. Well, your body can't survive on a trickle flow of blood. So what happens is your heart rate accelerates to work to bring that pressure up. And it's going to keep accelerating, but you keep losing blood. And until you stop losing blood, the heart is going to keep accelerating. Does that make sense?
Is there a mechanism where, because eventually if you're losing that much blood and your heart is working so hard, that would be kind of a deleterious, response, because your heart would just be pushing all your blood out of wherever it's coming out of from.
Right.
So I wondered if there was like, what was the switch? What was the turning point?
Well, eventually, hopefully, you're going to get
medical intervention.
Okay, my mom, I'm sorry. I'm hearing impaired. My mom is talking and you're talking. Say it again, Mom.
I say it's the lack of oxygen carrying capacity that's going to impact the ability of the heart muscle to pump. So the whole system's going to suffer because of the hypoxia.
Yeah. And eventually the only way to bring the heart rate back down again is to get the blood volume back up.
That's why they hooked you up to saline and pour it in like mad.
Did you hear that part? Okay, I'm glad this mic is that good.
So piggybacking off of David's question, it's the same receptors above the heart that detect that pressure that would increase the pumping even during like a heavy blood loss.
That's exactly right. That's right. That's
Okay.
perfect. That's right.
Closer to your question, David, I feel like I kind of thought the same thing and okay.
Well, Justin, why didn't you mention it?
Mary.
I tend to stay quiet unless I know it takes me a minute sometimes to get what I want to say or think out. So
I understand. I'm just giving you grief. Okay. So we went through this one. What the effector is, actually, no, the sweat is the effector. So last part of this, homeostasis is constantly being disrupted. You've got physical insults, have changes to the internal environment and physiological stress. If it's a mild or temporary disruption, balance is quickly restored. And think of balance as being homeostasis, quickly restored. An intense or prolonged disruption would be poisoning or severe infections. So you're always having homeostatic imbalances. So it's a normal equilibrium of body processes being disrupted. A moderate imbalance is a disorder or an abnormality of structure and function. So, and do you remember that structure function? Remember that's that complementarity stuff. So a lot of times this is an inherited disorder or some damage has been sustained, whether it was trauma or mild, you've sustained some sort of damage. Disease specific for an illness with recognizable signs and symptoms. Local disease, meaning it's affecting one part of the body or limited region of the body. Cancer, an infection of your big toe. Systemic disease either affects the entire body or several parts at once. Symptoms are subjective changes such as a headache or nausea that you cannot be directly measured. You've never been able to tell somebody what the degree of your headache and have them be able to quantify it. Signs and objective changes such as a fever or swelling in which you can observe it and measure it. A severe imbalance, death. So is it a sign or a symptom? Fatigue.
Symptom.
It's a symptom. Why is it a symptom, Samantha?
Oh, it's Kara.
Oh, Kara, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Would it be a symptom because it's not like a physical sign, like you, an observer, wouldn't be able to tell you that, oh, you have fatigue. It's just something you're feeling.
Right.
It's like an internal.
And it helps you understand why people with chronic fatigue get so frustrated. Because there's really no way of measuring that one. Heart rate, a headache. Sign or symptom?
Sign.
It's a sign. Or no, it's a symptom.
Oh,
it's a symptom. Oh, it's a symptom. Joint pain.
Symptom.
It's a symptom. A positive blood test for Borrelia burgdorferi.
Sign.
It's a sign. A bullseye rash.
Sign.
Sign. And a tick bite.
Sign.
Well, if you're pulling out the tick, it's pretty obvious. It's a good sign.
Here's your sign.
All right, that's funny. All right, Bell's palsy,
Fine.
Fine.
the sign. Suri goes to her family doctor, tells her that she has a headache and she feels nauseated. The doctor checks Suri's temp and finds that she has a fever. In the above situation, Suri's headache is a symptom of an illness, while the fever is a sign of illness. True or false?
True.
True.
So last part, any questions so far about any of that?
Can you just go, I guess, over again the difference between sign and symptom for like the Bell's palsy thing? That one was
Bell's palsy is you can see it,
yeah.
but there's no way to actually measure. Wait.
Okay. And that one's a sign, right? A symptom has to be measurable, right?
Let's reverse it. A sign is something you can see. A symptom is something the patient can sense, but the clinician cannot measure. There's no way to quantify it.
So does that mean one is subjective and then the other one is objective?
That would be another way to put it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No, that's a good question. Gradient, difference in chemical concentration, charge, temperature, or pressure between 2 points. This is another, we talked about how homeostasis is everything in anatomy and physiology. Gradients are everything with determining physiology. And everything always moves from a high to a low. Unless you physically force it to do something else. I think we talked about, it's really bad when I can't remember what we did last week. That's why I keep a thing here to tell me where we are in the PowerPoints. What did we do in lab last week? We talked about cells. If you remember when we were talking about cells and being in that room of a high concentration or a lot of people in that small room, and I said, how many of you would try to get out of that room? If we have 200 people in a 10 by 10 room, how many are going to try to get out?
Like almost all of us are enough so that you felt comfortable if you stayed in the other room.
Right. So that's everything moves from a high to a low. Unless you physically make it go the other way. Like if we push the 4 people that were in the adjacent room into the room that has 100 people. Well, we have to push them in there. They're not going to go in there willingly. So matter and energy tend to flow down these gradients. Let me say one more thing about that idea that there's 100 people in one room, 4 in the other room. That's a difference in the gradient of the number of people. So blood flows from a place of higher pressure to a place of lower pressure. The movement in the opposite direction is going up the gradient, and this type of movement always requires the spending of metabolic energy. So moving down the gradient doesn't require an input of any excess energy. It's only the internal kinetic energy or the inherent energy of someone. Unless we're at 0 degrees Kelvin, which is ultimate no temperature heat, we always have some amount of internal energy. And we use that to move down gradients. Unless we push it the other direction with some energy being put into the system, it's always going to flow from a high to a low. So chemicals flow down concentration gradients. Charged particles flow down electrical gradients. And heat flows down thermal gradients. Any questions about this? You all have seen the thermal gradients. If you think about, if you ever have space heaters, where is it warmest? Right next to where it's generating the heat, right? And it moves from that area out because it's moving down a gradient of concentration of heat. I still think of all of these, and it's easier for me to think of it as all these being a concentration, being a higher number, higher area, higher amount of molecules with increased temperature are going to move out. Let's take 10 minutes here and jump into the next chapter. The next chapter, I think this semester, is probably one of the hardest chapters we're going to have. It's all about chemistry. And I'm hopefully, what? I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to give up my teaching assistant. Okay. Do you want to go in there? She says, let me think about it. My mom is getting ready for bed and she's like, you want me to take her? And I said, I don't know if I'm willing to give up my teaching assistant. Come on. Yeah, she's a little bit of a traitor. She's leaving me. So let's come back in 10 minutes. So come back at 7:17 and we will start into the next chapter. I have to say that question about the heart rate and the blood volume. The only reason that wouldn't be considered a positive feedback loop would be part of it is that those receptors, they are firing more when there's an increase and fire less when there's a drop. They respond to a pressure going up rather than a pressure drop. Well, that doesn't really work either. Never mind. It sounded good until I said it out loud, and now it doesn't sound very good. It really is the heart just trying to make up for the fact that we're losing too much blood. And I'm trying, if it's a really, 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 really good question. And I wonder, because this is my first time teaching 122 for hack. I'm wondering if we will talk about circulatory shock. And if we do, I'll come back to it again in this class, because that will give me a chance to study up on it. Because it's really that your body is trying to maintain a flow. And the only way for it to do it when you're significantly bleeding out is to bring up the heart rate. And it's why people get very clammy at the same time, because now what's going on is that their peripheral vessels are constricting to then maintain the blood flow within the organs. And that's why people get very clammy. And will also, I think, they'll start to, Mom, will they start to shake? Because I think it's, well, when when they start to lose too much blood, don't they start to shake? Because you're also at that point, you're losing heat. Not always. All right. Okay. Let me think about it a little bit and we'll come back to, we'll revisit that one. All right, let's jump into this. And like I said, this is probably one of the hardest chapters, but it is the basis of a lot of what we'll talk about. So that's why it's also one of the most important chapters. So if you're not sure, give yourself a little bit of time to think about it and come back with questions. A lot of chemistry, especially at this level, it's kind of abstract. And I'll try to put it into the best terms I can, but recognize that it can be kind of abstract in a lot of ways. So the chemistry of life, why do we care about it? Well, because that's where the basis of anatomy and physiology is. Molecules become macromolecules based on the fact that their chemistry dictates how they're going to interact with other molecules. How the macroorganelles move within a cell and interact with one another is based on their chemistry, which dictates what they're capable of doing, how are they capable of interacting. So first, basic principles. The science, so the chemistry is the science of the structure and interactions of matter. Matter is anything that occupies space and has a mass. The different states of matter are a solid, a liquid, and a gas. A mass is the amount of matter a substance contains, and the weight is the force of gravity that acts on that mass. So if you think of it, a 1 liter of gas, it has a weight, it's just a very low weight. A 1 liter of a drink has a much higher weight, but they both have the same mass. The weight is the 20 grams. The volume is the 1 liter. Or let's put it this way, put it in less scientific terms. The weight is the 16 ounces. The mass is the 1 liter. And the states of matter can either be a solid, a liquid, or a gas. Chemical elements are unique substances that can't be broken down into simpler substances by ordinary chemical methods. My mom was trying to explain to me the other day that the microwave destroys vitamin C in foods. And in my head, I can't figure out how that happens. And I told her I can't, because if I remember the basic structure of it, I don't see how it's going to be broken down like that. Because a lot of times it's really hard to break chemical bonds. But chemical elements are even harder to break down. So substances that can't be broken down into simpler substances based on normal chemical means. You can't heat them to the point of where you break them down. You can't dissolve them to the point of where they break down. Can't boil them to where they break down. So chemical elements are pure substances that consist of only one type of atom. There are 91 naturally occurring elements on the earth, and 24 of those play normal physiological roles. If you look here, these first 6 are 98, count for 98.5% of your body's mass. Lesser elements, sulfur, potassium, sodium, chlorine, magnesium, iron. We'll learn, especially when we talk about potassium, sodium, and chlorine, that even though these only take up 0.8% of your total body mass, they're critical. Iron is also, but especially for this semester, potassium, sodium, and chlorine are critical. Trace elements that are mainly involved in maintaining the structures of enzymes and neurotransmitters and hormones. Several of the elements that make up the human body are minerals that have to be taken in via our diet. And they make up approximately 4% of the human body weight. 75% is calcium and phosphate. Chlorine is, 25% is chlorine, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. One that also is, well, I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not going to say it because I think I'm wrong. Some examples of this, you have crystallized calcium, phosphate, magnesium, fluorine, and sulfur ions in your bones and your teeth. Your enamel is the hardest tissue of your body because of the crystallized minerals within it. Proteins commonly contain sulfur. Phosphate is a major component of nucleic acids, ATP, and cell membranes. You'll see I'm only putting down their chemical symbols here. And I'm doing that for a reason. It's because I want you to start looking at charts like this to figure out what chemical elements these are. I want you to get in a habit of thinking of it that way and looking at it that way. But calcium, phosphate, magnesium, fluorine, and sulfur. Many proteins contain sulfur. Phosphate is a major component of nucleic acids, which is DNA and RNA, ATP, and cell membranes. Enzymes and other organic molecules require minerals to function. Some elements are trace elements that are required to prevent disease. A lot of these are our trace elements. Even though we don't tend to need a lot of them, we still require them in small amounts. And iodine deficiency prevents production of thyroid hormones like growth hormone, resulting in the formation of goiters. You look, she's got an enlargement on her neck because her thyroid is trying to use what the tissue it has to make up for the fact that it can't make enough thyroid hormone, so it proliferates in tissue. Because if it proliferates in tissue, maybe it can reach the required amount of thyroid hormone that needs to be released. Maybe it can produce it. Without iron, your body cannot transport oxygen. Fluoride is usually added to municipal water and dental products to help reduce tooth decay. So all chemical elements are made of atoms. Actually, let me stop right here. Any questions so far? You guys are usually pretty good about interrupting me. So but are there any questions?
Curious about like fluoride being a trace mineral and like why it's added to water.
I knew that was going to come up. I knew it was.
Curious, like if our body's supposed to have it, then why are most people lacking it so much and fluoride's just being added to everything? Is it because we're like, are people really that deficient in it, or is society just kind of decided that it's really important and they just want to like make sure? I mean,
I think there's a lot of debate out there about how critical it is. I know because I'm kind of a toothpaste snob, and we'll talk about this later in the semester, but I'm kind of a toothpaste snob. And I am because I have problems with my teeth. And I've learned that there's one particular toothpaste and one active ingredient that works better than anything else. And I won't use anything except for that at this point. And we'll talk about why I'm a toothpaste snob later. But actually, why don't we do this first really quickly? Because I'm not going to try to come up with an answer because I may not be right anyway. I'm going to go in. There's a site. This is my favorite medical research site because this is the federal government medical research primary journal site, primary literature journal site, medical research database. Fluoride. Necessity. Requirement. So what this does is when I put in that information, it brings up any paper that's been published in the scientific literature that has those words in it. And let's do a little bit better of a search. Oh, it's only got 4 results. Let's see what it's, let's see here. Fluoride requirement, maybe that's what I want instead. Okay, fluoride and oral health. So looking at this one, this was 2016. It says a discovery during the first half of the 20th century of the link between natural fluoride adjusted fluoride levels in drinking water and reduced dental caries prevalence proved to be a stimulus for worldwide ongoing research into the role of fluoride improving oral health. Epidemiological studies of fluoridation programs have confirmed their safety and their effectiveness in controlling dental caries. Major advances in our knowledge of how fluoride impacts the caries process have led to the development and assessment of effectiveness and promotion of other fluoride vehicles, including salt, milk, tablets, toothpaste, gels, and varnishes. In 1993, the World Health Organization, or we call them WHO also, convened an expert committee to provide authoritative information on the role of fluorides in the promotion of oral health throughout the world. This present publication is a revision of the original 1994 document. It's a revised revision of that document that they came up with in 1993. Again, using the expertise of researchers from the extensive fields of knowledge required to successfully implement complex interventions. Bear with me, I'm going to scroll through some of this. Maybe I'm not going to. Financial support for research into the development of these new fluoride strategies has come from many sources, including government health departments, as well as international and national grant agencies. In addition, the unique role which the industry has played in the development of formulation assessment of effectiveness, promotion of fluoride vehicles and strategies is noteworthy. This updated version of fluoride and oral health has adopted an evidence-based approach to its commentary on different fluoride vehicles and strategies, and also its recommendations. In this regard, a full account is taken of the many recent systematic reviews published in, and of course it didn't tell us anything except to tell us that they were going to tell us. Give me 1 second.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It just, like, I understand, when interventions and treatment are needed for more like on an individual basis, but I mean, it sounds like, we probably eat differently than we used to, and certain probably changes and, and that kind of stuff probably affect our teeth and our,
I think it's one of those things. I want to say it's, if you looked here, here's the title of this paper. The pathogenesis, and you remember what genesis means. Did we talk about genesis before?
Yeah, like the beginning.
The beginning, or don't think of it as the beginning, think of it as the creation of something.
Okay.
Pathology meaning the study of disease. So this is the beginning of a disease of endemic fluorosis. Research progress in the last 5 years. So, and what it says right here is that humans and animals appear to suffer different degrees and damage after long-term direct or indirect exposure to more fluoride than required. What I want to say is that most trace minerals, almost any of the trace minerals, you can get too much of. So it's not appropriate to take in extensive amounts and go beyond what you're supposed to have, but you do need a certain amount. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and you're not the first one to ask it. I think, I think some people are afraid of it. I mean, I remember, I think I had a student last semester who said that she didn't give fluoride to any of her children. And I don't know if that's such a good idea either. Because I think there's a certain amount that you need to have. But it also needs to be in a form that you can use it. I told you I'm a toothpaste snob, and if I could remember what my toothpaste said it had in it, it's not the sodium fluorine that you tend to find in most toothpaste.
Are you talking about sodium fluoride?
I think so, but it's not that one. It's a different form of it.
I have some friends that are dentists, or they're like they're in the residency for dentistry,
right?
Like they have a dental school and everything. They say be careful what toothpaste you use, because the toothpaste that say that they restore your they restore your enamel and stuff, that's not actually true. It's there's once you lose your enamel,
there's not a whole lot.
Yeah, there's no way to restore it. So just be careful of like what you use in terms of toothpaste. And also they say, my friends have told me that you don't want to use a bleach based toothpaste either, or else you would be going to see them more often than you want. And he's going to be he's going to be prosthodontics, which is teeth prosthetics. And then my other friend is endodontics. So they told me all about that.
I use this. This is what's found in Crest Pro Health. It's also found in Parodontax, which your dentist friends probably swear by too. It's stannous fluoride. So it's a zinc fluoride rather than a sodium fluoride. And what I've noticed, and what my dentist actually told me, it's known to have better antimicrobial properties. And what it does, in plain language for me, what it does is stop bleeding of the gums. And the sodium fluoride that's typically in toothpaste doesn't work like that, at least not for me. And when we get into bones, I'll tell you specifically more about why I deal with what I deal with. But it comes from the fact that I broke my jaw in 4 places 20 years ago in a car accident. And it kind of started an adventure that's gone on. And with that has come the fact that I've struggled with bloody gums for years. And then I started using this, and all of a sudden I don't have bloody gums anymore. And my gums are actually really, really healthy. My teeth, not so much, but my gums are really, really healthy. But it's just a variant. It's not sodium fluoride, it's stannous fluoride. And why it works the way it does, I don't know. I just know that it does a really good job. And it's found in Parodontax and Crest Pro Health, as far as I know. So I don't really have an answer for that question, is what it comes down to, except for I know that you can overdose, but almost any trace mineral, any trace mineral you can overdose on.
All right. Well, thank you for what information that you did give. I appreciate it.
There's a really long-winded answer to a question. So atoms, smallest particles of an element that still exhibit the same chemical properties of that element. Atoms are the building blocks of elements. They are composed of subatomic particles, and you can't see it underneath here. When you put it into D2L, it squishes things together sometimes. Atoms are composed of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Typically when we draw an atom, we draw it in this Bohr model planetary where the electrons are orbiting a nucleus, which is made of protons and neutrons. However, in reality, the electrons are known to be in a cloud around the nucleus. And the orbitals are the most average place where those electrons can or will be found. They're so small that you can't pinpoint exactly where one is. But you know that they're most likely to be within these orbits on average. But when we really think about what they're doing and how they look like they're swarming in a cloud where there's certain averages. They average to be more likely to be in one area of the cloud, one orbit of the cloud, than another area. One thing that I'll say really quick, and I had one student ask me, are you sure this is all real? Well, no, you can't see an atom. I don't think anybody has ever seen an atom. I know I've used NMR, which is nuclear magnetic resonance, where you can bring the hydrogen atoms to the point of where they're vibrating and you can measure that. But it's that same idea of the cell theory, that all life comes from pre-existing cells. That's also considered a theory. The theory of atoms is considered the atomic theory. However, if we don't want to believe in the atomic theory, how did we create an atomic bomb? And what is that? I have on my, you guys know, I've told you, I've already admitted to it that I'm kind of a geek. And I have a beaker up on my shelf here that was used in the laboratory of the Philadelphia project. And if you're familiar with that, that's where they developed the atomic bomb. And I'll grab it, just give me 1 second here, just because it's cool.
I thought that was the Manhattan Project.
Oh, now you're getting me all, you're right. You're right. But it is from then. Let me see here.
But I don't know. I've had my
thought
history
it was
professors use both terms, both
I thought it was used in
Philadelphia and
Philadelphia,
Manhattan.
maybe I need to do a little bit more research. But this is the beaker. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. This is the beaker. And my grandma, who passed away several years ago, purchased this at some point. And so it was given to me because I'm the scientist in the family. And you can see it doesn't look anything like what your typical beakers tend to look like. But
it's really beautiful.
It is, isn't it? It's pretty amazing. But if the atomic theory is not real, how did we generate an atomic bomb? And not that I'm pro or pro, I have mixed emotions when it comes to the atomic bomb idea. I have lived where in Japan where we dropped it, and I lived there for 17 months. And so I have very mixed emotions with it, but just the idea that we could develop something like that. If they're not real, how did we develop that? The reasoning behind that had to have come from somewhere. I'm going to put it back. Because you guys are so smart, you're catching me up on all these ideas I think I have and realize they're not completely right. I'm going to look up the Manhattan and Philadelphia projects and see if they're actually, what's the relationship between those things. So electrons forming the electron cloud in an atom occupy regions of space called electron shells. And each shell can contain one or more orbitals. Each orbital can contain, can contain 2 electrons. So here is one shell that only has 1 orbit and there's 2 electrons in it. This shell contains 4 electrons, which means that there's 2 orbits there because there's only 2 electrons per orbital. So the electrons in an atom continue to fill out the shells, 2 per orbit, until we don't have any more atoms to fill orbits. The first the first shell only has 1 orbit. Every other shell has 4 orbits. So the first one is 2 electrons, filled by 2 electrons. Every other shell, because it contains 4 orbits, can contain up to 8 electrons. Do you see the math reasoning here? So each orbit contains 2 electrons. The first shell contains 1 orbit. Therefore, it can hold 2 electrons. The next shell, and the next shell after that, and the next shell after that, and the next shell after that, contains 4 orbits. And since each orbit can contain 2 electrons, each shell can contain 8.
So I have a question.
And I'll see if I can answer. Go.
So for the atoms and everything, is this the same thing as like radio, like as radiation? Like, is it the same?
You know what?
Like
hold on to that question. Hold on to it just for a little bit longer. Because yes, it is.
Okay.
But it's a little different. Hold on to it. We're going to get there in like 20 minutes. Hold on to it. Maybe less than that. But the most outer shell that contains electrons is called the valence shell. So the valence shell of any atom can contain up to 8 electrons, because each orbit can contain 2 electrons, and outside of the first shell, every orbit can contain up to 8 electrons. With hydrogen that only has 1 electron, this is its valence shell, because it only has 1 electron. If it had 2, it would be helium. Helium isn't on here. But it's still, that is the most outer shell because that's all the electrons hydrogen has. So if you know how many electrons an atom has, you can determine how many shells it's going to have. First one contains 2, the next one contains 8, the next one contains 8, until you run out of electrons.
I have a quick question.
Go.
Sorry, so looking at the slide that we were just on, so we have the 6, because I'm just trying to like
Which
visualize
one?
what these
This
numbers mean.
one?
Oh, no, back down one, the Bohr models of atoms. So what is the, can you just explain really quickly the 6 and the 12? I'm sorry if you already did that. I'm not clear on, I can understand the 6, but I'm trying to figure out the 12 part.
Oh, wait. Hold on to that one. Hold on to that question for just a little bit longer. Don't look at that yet.
Okay.
Don't look at that yet. Hold on to that for 1 second, because yeah, we'll get to that. We're coming on that, Kara. People are so impatient. It's like, radioactivity, what's that number? I'm like, hold on just for a second. So periodic tables. Elements are arranged in the periodic table according to their atomic structures. Those numbers, Kara, have to do with the atomic structure. So just hold on to it for 1 second here. They're arranged on the periodic table according to their atomic structures, which results in their different chemical properties. I'm not wanting you to memorize this periodic table. I can tell you I was a chemist as an undergrad, and I graduated with a bachelor's in chemistry with an emphasis in biochemistry. And I never memorized the periodic table. Nobody does. You just need to know how to use it.
So we would just need to know the abbreviations, basically.
What?
Or recognize, so we would need to recognize the abbreviations.
Be able to recognize the abbreviations, and we'll talk about what those numbers mean, because that's what Kara's asking about. Because if you look, Kara, if you look right here, this 12 and 6 right here for carbon, here's carbon right here. Do you see what the numbers are?
Yes.
They're the same, right? They're just flipped.
Mm-hmm.
So that has to do with the numbers of their atomic structures, and we're getting to it.
Great, thank you.
So elements are arranged on a periodic table according to their atomic structures, which results in their different chemical properties. Vertical columns, going straight down, vertical columns are elements in a similar group that share the similar characteristics. For example, they form the same types of chemical bonds. Horizontal rows are periods, where the atomic number of every element increases by 1 from left to right. To answer one of Kara's questions, the first number, the bigger number, most likely the bigger number. Wait, let me make sure. No, one of the numbers, let's just say one of the numbers is the atomic number. And the atomic number is the number of protons within a substance, within an atom. And if you see the atomic number going from sodium to magnesium, it's going up by 1. Silicon to phosphate, sulfur to chlorine to argon. It's going up by 1. Hydrogen to helium, it's going up by 1. Lithium, beryllium, it's going up by 1. So that when they're in the horizontal rows, the atomic number, which is, to answer one of Kara's questions, is the number of protons within the atom of that given element. It increases from left to right by 1. The atoms of these elements all have the same number of electron shells. Remember what the electron shell is. That's this. Same number of electron shells. This one has 3 shells. This one has 3 shells. Phosphate and sulfur come down here. Well, maybe not. Yep, right here. Phosphate and sulfur, they're part of the same period. Now to answer more of what Kara's question. Atomic number. Atomic number is the number of protons within an atom. In stable atoms, the number of protons equals the number of electrons. Talk about what stable atoms are in one moment. The number of electrons determines the chemical nature of an atom, or the chemical behavior of an atom, or the chemical behavior of an element. Remember that the atom is the smallest form of a given element, of any element. The mass number, which is the other number that Kara was asking about, is the other number that Kara was asking about, is the sum of the number of protons and neutrons that are, and remember the protons and the neutrons are both in the nucleus. The elements are in the shells and the orbits within those shells.
So if someone,
go ahead, sorry.
If someone asked me to find the number, like asked me how many neutrons a particular element or atom had, you would just subtract the protons from that mass number and you would get the neutrons?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And and this is leading, your question is leading into Lauren's question about radioactivity.
Nice.
So you guys planned it that way, I'm sure you did.
We had coffee.
Isotopes are atoms with the same number of protons and electrons, but can contain different number of neutrons. The atomic weight is the mass or the average of all the mass numbers of all the isotopes of a given element. Here's one form of the atom of hydrogen, has 1 proton, no neutrons, and an electron. Here's another isotope of hydrogen, deuterium, which has 1 proton, 1 electron, 1 neutron and 1 electron. Tritium has 1 proton, 2 neutrons and an electron. Element lithium has 3 protons and 4 neutrons in its nucleus. What is its mass number? Assume that protons and neutrons have the same mass.
C7.
It's 7. An atom, I'm going to shift this over here. An atom with a mass number of 18 that contains 10 neutrons would have an atomic number of what?
8.
Why do you say that, Kara?
I might have been, I don't know. I
No,
just
well, you're right.
subtracted-
I just want you to tell me why you're right.
Oh, I subtracted the neutrons from the mass number, which was the question I had just asked.
And so what is the atomic number by definition? What does that mean?
It's the total of protons and neutrons in
No,
an atom.
it's just the neutrons. It's just the it's just the protons. So the mass number,
Oh, yeah.
mass,
Mhm.
yeah, mass number is the total number of neutrons and protons. The atomic number is the total number of protons.
Right.
And the number of protons in one atom that has a 0 charge, and then it'll make sense why it has to have a 0 charge in 1 second. The number of protons equals the number of electrons if it has a 0 charge. Isotopes, so this is Lauren's question. Actually, bear with me, let me make sure. Okay, yeah, isotopes. This is radioactivity. Go ahead, Christine, I'm sorry.
You're saying the unstable atom is the number of protons equals the number of electrons. You said if there's no charge.
If there's no charge, what protons have a positive charge, electrons have a negative charge, neutrons have a neutral charge. What that means is that if the number of protons equals the number of electrons, there's a 0 charge on the atom. Does that make sense? Because they cancel one another out.
Okay, does that have a name or it just has that explanation?
That's just the explanation for right now.
Okay.
Because it also, if you can determine what the atomic number is, you know what the number of electrons is too. Because it equals the number of protons. Atoms that don't have a 0 charge are not stable. That's why we always think of an atom first. Because we can determine the number of electrons because of the number of protons. So what makes isotopes? So this is the beginning of that radiation question. What makes isotopes? Isotopes are atoms that have the same number of protons, same number of electrons, but different numbers of neutrons. So 3 isotopes of hydrogen. Hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium. Isotopes are unstable elements which will lose nuclear particles until they become stable. Some isotopes are more unstable than others. This is the radioisotope stuff. This is the radiation. So heavier isotopes of many atoms. So when we think of heavier, electrons don't count towards mass. So we're referring to elements that have a lot of protons and have a high atomic number. I don't know if this is always the case now that I think about it, because I know that tritium, which doesn't have a very high mass, is radioactive. But for right now, know that if it's an unstable isotope that can decompose spontaneously, it's a radioisotope. I'm not going to ask you to classify whether you think a given element could be a radioisotope. I want you to be able to identify, if I tell you this is the number of protons, this is the number of neutrons. Is it possibly an isotope? So their atoms decompose spontaneously into more stable atoms if it's an unstable isotope, which AKA an unstable isotope is a radioisotope. The process of atomic decay, like mini explosions, is called radioactivity. This decay involves the emission of alpha, beta, and gamma rays from the atomic nucleus. Here's your parent isotope, and it will radioactively decay until it becomes a more stable atom. It can either give off a helium nucleus, which is 2 protons and 2 neutrons. This is alpha rays. This definition, alpha rays right here. It can give off electrons, which is a beta ray. Or it can give off photons, which are high power light rays, gamma rays. Or think of almost a photon as being an electron, a high powered electron. The radioisotopes of an element will transform into other elements until they're more stable. Lauren, are you going to ask questions about radiation?
I was gonna ask if it was just like the same thing regarding I forgot what I was gonna ask. It'll come to me.
All right.
When it comes to me in the middle of the night.
Oh, well, don't call me in the middle of the night with it. But if it comes between now and even on Thursday, no, Wednesday, bring it up then too.
I'll send you an email. How about that?
Well, I may not be able to describe it. I'll try. Okay. All types of radioactivity damage tissue. Alpha emission is the least penetrating. Remember, that's the helium nucleus. Nevertheless, inhaled alpha particles from radon, uranium decay, causes lung cancer, second only to smoking. Gamma emission has the greatest penetrating power. It's used to destroy localized cancers. Remember, that's the photon. And a photon is essentially a light ray. Ionizing radiation, or beta rays, knock electrons out of atoms, and these electrons then disable other things. So they knock electrons out of that atom. And electrons, because they're negatively charged, things that are charged are not stable. And these are small things, and so they can go on and join other atoms. And because we know that structure and function are everything, when you add electrons to something that you shouldn't be, you're going to change its structure. Change the structure of the atom, change the function of the atom. So isotopes gradually lose their radioactive behavior. The time required for a radioisotope to lose half of its radioactivity and become a more stable atom is its physical half-life. This, if you think about it, you've probably heard about biological half-lives, how long a medication lasts in your body before you have to take it again, right? I know we have people in the healthcare field in here already. So this is the same thing. This is how long does it take for an isotope to lose half of its radioactivity and become a stable atom is its physical half-life. This half-life can vary between hours to thousands of years. The biological half-life is how long it takes for a radioisotope to lose half of its radioactivity within the human body. Radioisotopes are tools that can be used in research and medicine. A question that David asked at the very, one of the first days that we had class, the first day we had lecture last week, he said, when do they use, do they use PET scans for other things besides the brain images? And we talked about how they use them in cancers. This is one of those. So this is using radioactively labeled iodine to measure the activity of a metabolite labeled with that radioactive iodine, to measure its breakdown within the thyroid. This is normal emission coming off. This is Graves' disease, which causes hyperthyroidism. And if you want to think of it, hyperthyroidism is a proliferation of that tissue. So could you call that cancerous? I don't really have an answer for that one. I would say on a level, yes. Because it is proliferating when it normally shouldn't, but it's trying to compensate for the fact that you need more of it.
I don't remember what I was gonna ask.
Okay.
Like when you're looking at like an atom or when you're looking at something on a slide, how do you know if it's like radioactive or not?
That's a really good question, and I don't really have a good answer for you. What they say is that the heavier isotopes, the heavier atoms, but then I look at tritium, which I know is radioactivity. I know it's got radioactive powers. I've spilled it on a counter. That's why I know that it has radioactive capabilities. And it's not a heavy isotope. It's not a heavy atom. So I don't know. But I do have friends that I could ask about that one. So let me ask. Give me a chance to come back to that.
Okay, I'll ask you next week.
Oh, shoot, darn it. All right, let me come up with I'll come up with something. For any particular element, the number of what can vary. Therefore, the mass number of an element will vary.
I can
What would you
guess.
say? What?
Since no one's guessing, I
I
can
know.
guess. Would it be?
I would say neutrons.
Why do you say neutrons?
I'm just guessing.
No, why? Well, why do you say that? Don't.
Because I know neutrons is like one of the deciding factors for an atom, and depending on how many neutrons an atom has depends on the type of atom it is. I don't know.
So the number of protons will not vary. The number of neutrons will, because remember, that's how we create isotopes. So the mass number is the sum of the number of protons and the number of neutrons. Questions?
Can you just clarify? You said that the number of protons won't vary.
It will not vary.
And that is because
it just doesn't. If it does, it's going to be a different atom.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's going to be a different element. If you remember, if we look up here, the atomic number going up by 1 every time, this is a new proton being added every time. And if you add a proton, it changes the element.
Okay.
So it's not going to vary. I was going to say to carry it, take it on faith, but let's not go that way. Let's just say that it just doesn't, because it's going to change that. It's going to change the element.
Okay.
Okay. So molecules and compounds. Molecules is 2 or more atoms held together by chemical bonds. And a compound is 2 or more atoms of different elements bound together. So all compounds are molecules, but not all, all molecules are all compounds are molecules, but not all molecules are compounds. Compounds are different. Molecules can be the same or different. A compound is different, is 2 different elements, 2 or more different elements. A molecule is the same or different. If you think about it like a compound medicine, what they've done is they've added something else to it. So this is a molecule. This is a molecule. This is oxygen gas. This is water. This is a compound. This is a molecule. But they're both molecules too. But this is not a compound. That might have just came out very confusing. They're both molecules, but when there's atoms of different elements bound, then it's a compound also. Each molecule can be represented by a molecular formula, which identifies the number of each type of atom within a given molecule. So in water, there's 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen. So 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen. excuse me, in methane, there's 1 carbon and 4 hydrogen. So there's 1 carbon and 4 hydrogen. The lowercase subcase sub whatever is the number of the atoms in that particular thing. When it's blank here, it's 1. Questions?
You might get to this later, but I'm going to shoot my shot anyway. The order of these like atoms in the molecule is, how does that get decided? Like it's CH4, but could it, why isn't it 4H4C?
It could be. It
Okay.
could be. I don't really know.
This might just be a more advanced.
That's a good one. Oh, I don't know.
Great.
Yeah.
I just saw it and I was like,
yeah.
I'm curious.
I thought I could come up with a good answer, but the ones I'm coming up with don't work. So I wanted to say it has to do with their where they are on the periodic table, and that's not it either. I don't know. I think we get a standard. There's certain molecules that are out there, and we develop a standard. Glucose always has the same molecular formula, and anybody can identify it, and we don't switch it around. And I'm not.
I know that.
Go ahead.
I know that in chemistry courses I've taken that sometimes the molecular formula can be written differently to reflect, you know, the
arrangement,
modeled structure of how each atom is bonded to the following atom.
Right. Yep. That's right. But why would the hydrogens come before the oxygen? And
I can't remember. I know that there's a certain.
All right, David, it's your job to remember. I'm decided for the moment I'm not a chemist. I'm an anatomist and physiologist, but David is a chemist. He can figure this out.
So I'm neither, but I did Google it, and there's apparently a formal document published by the IUPAC that established the order.
Oh,
so
the name of common name, Union of Common Chemical Nomenclature, something like that. Okay.
Yeah, and they said, roughly speaking, it's metals first, other cations second, hydrogen next, metalloids next, and halogens and chalcogens last. Every ion group is listed together. Naming conventions for organic carbon molecules are even more complicated. So it's standardized.
Okay.
I was just honestly, I was curious because I doubt we'll be balancing, or I don't know, we might be balancing.
We won't be.
Okay, because that was my question, like if that shows up, I don't know how to write it.
Nope. I could show you. I could show you pretty. It's not that hard. I could show you at some point, and it doesn't have to do with how you write the molecular formula. But it's okay. A molecule is the smallest particle of a compound that still exhibits the same characteristics of the compound. So sodium and chloride. The molecular weight is the sum of the atomic weights of the number of each atom. Now, what this is, a mole is a very big number. David, do you remember what that really big number is called? With his chemistry background? See if he comes back.
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
What does the mole mean? What's a really big number? It's Avogadro's number. What is it? I'm gonna be really
it's like
impressed.
6.02 times 10 to the 23.
Listen to him. He's got it down. See, I couldn't remember it the other day for one of my classes. So what this Avogadro's number says that there's this many sodium molecules, 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd number of sodium. And the mass, or excuse me, the weight of that number of sodium atoms is 23 grams. Don't worry so much about remembering that. Just understand that there's a reason we think that this is the molecular weight of sodium is 23 grams. Chlorine is 35.5. And it's because so many 6 times 0.022 times 10 to the 23rd sodium atoms equals 23 grams. And
Is
that's
that like on a question?
You could be asked, you know what they want. I'm not going to ask you to measure something's molecular weight. Wait for your chemistry class to ask you that. But right now, understand that's why we have a mole here, is it is the sum of this weight, 23 grams, is the weight of 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd number of sodium atoms. Bear with me. I'm gonna put this into context for you so you recognize how big this number is. Because when we talked about how small atoms are, six point two times 10 to the 23rd. Now, just for a second here. That is a 6022 and then 23 zeros. Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Make sure that I'm not losing count here. Yeah. Oh. There's 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. And then you put all the commas in there. That's how many atoms of sodium are in 23 grams of sodium. The only reason I'm giving you that is because like David said, it's a pretty standard number. And it's a number that somebody came up with at some point, and we use it just as a standard measurement because atoms are so small. And because we have to have a way of determining something's molecular weight. So for 23 grams of sodium plus 35.5 grams of chlorine gives a molecular weight of sodium chloride, which is your typical sea salt, 58.44 grams per mole. Isomers, moving on a little bit. Any questions about this first? You will see on things, my sister has developed developed a lotion that's made of, has cannabis in it and caffeine. And it's an incredible lotion. And she's in the process of trying to get it patented. But she's not a chemist. And she was asking me about molecular weights and what they meant. So what they have to do is if you take you take the atomic weight for each atom and times it by the number of atoms in that molecule. So for hydrogen, it's 1.008. Take that molecular weight, times it by 4, times the molecular weight of carbon, and you have the molecular weight of methane. Isomers are molecules with the same. Are you going to start to bark now, Ruby? You are. All right. Let's see how loud she gets in the next 7 minutes. If she gets loud, I'll have to go get my mom up. Molecules with the same molecular formulas, but the atoms are structurally arranged differently. This is what David was saying. The molecular formulas can be written differently to try to assess the way the different atoms are bound to one another. So ethanol and ethyl ether have the same molecular formula. Ethanol is you guys bear with me. I'm sorry. I've got to watch this dog. Just a sec. Ruby, just a sec. Come on, come back this way. Mom, I need to look at her. She's going to go back. She'll do something. I'm going to shut this door so she doesn't do anything back there. I apologize. I don't know if I told you the history behind this big dog. I won't tell you tonight. I'll tell you another time. But she's technically not our dog. But we've been watching her for the last 2 months and just recently had her come into our house.
I think you told us last week.
Did I? Okay, good. Yeah, but she's very house trained, but she just starts to bark louder and louder until someone takes her out. Molecules with the same molecular formulas, but the atoms are structurally arranged differently. Ethanol is what you find in alcoholic beverages. Ethyl ether is a gas. Ethanol, it can be vaporized fairly easily, but it's not a gas at room temperature by itself. They both have the same structural, same molecular formulas because they have the same number of each type of atom, but they're arranged differently. This is one of those things where you remember how we talked about structure and function. The fact that this hydrogen is here and not here gives this molecule different chemical properties from this molecule, or vice versa. This one has different properties from this one. So the chemical and physiological properties of two isomers can be very different. Another example, these are two amino acids. Amino acids are the subunits that make up proteins. D-alanine and L-alanine. L-alanine, L amino acids. And if you look, just look at them for a second and you'll see that they're arranged slightly differently. They're mirror images of one another. L amino acids are the isomers that are commonly incorporated into polypeptides. D amino acids are not. They fit, the one won't fit the enzyme right. The D ones don't fit in. The L ones do. And it's a structural difference. We'll talk about this slide and then we'll stop. When atoms combine with other atoms, they're held together by chemical bonds, and which is an energy relationship between the electrons of the reacting atoms. The likelihood that an atom will form a chemical bond depends on the number of electrons within the valence shell. Remember, how many electrons do valence shells allow?
Is it 8?
It's 8. If the electron, like hydrogen, only has one shell, it only has 2 electrons because that first shell only contains 2. Can hold only up to 2. So what this means is that atoms will react with other atoms up to the point of where they get their valence shell full. Either 2 or 8. If it's hydrogen, it's going to be 2. If it's oxygen, which has 2 orbits and the outer one contains 8, it's going to react up until it gets 8 electrons. So the likelihood that an atom will form a bond, you can predict whether or not it's going to, depends on the number of electrons in the valence shell. This is what we call the octet rule. Octet, if you think like an octagon, meaning it has 8 sides. Octet rule means that it is going to fill until it fills its valence shell, which in most cases is 8, except for hydrogen and helium. But helium doesn't react with anything because it already has 2 electrons in its valence shell. Now she's acting like she doesn't need to go out. Questions about this so far?
So if you had 2 different atoms that both had completely full valence shells, they could not bond together?
They don't react. They don't react. If you let me show you something, and we'll end right here, but Kara, let me show you something really quick, and then we'll be done with this for right now. Oh, Mary, go back up. Right here, helium has 2. Remember, 2 electrons, because the number of electrons equals the number of protons. So this is the atomic number. So if the number of protons is 2, number of electrons is 2, its shell is full. Because that first valence shell only contains 2. The next one here, neon, has 10. So it has 2 in that first shell and then 8 in the next. It doesn't have any more electrons. So and 8 is the max that one shell can hold. So it's not going to react with anything. Argon is 2 in the first shell, got 18. So 2 in the first shell, 8 in the next, and 8 in the next. So it's full. It's got 3 shells and they're completely full. It doesn't react with anything. This one that I can't remember what it is, but it's also full. These are right over on the very far right column, far right group of the periodic table. And they're called the noble gases. Because of their valence electrons shells are all full, they don't react with anything, including them each other.
Awesome, thank you.
You guys have a wonderful 2 days. When we come back, we're going to start talking about tissues. So bear with me that our labs and our lectures don't run parallel with one another yet, but they will eventually. But I will see you on Wednesday.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You guys are a
Thank you.
great class. My
Thank
mom
you.
was saying, "Yeah, what a great class you are." So thank you.
Have a good night.
You
You're
too.
welcome.
Thank you. Okay, you're supposed to bark, Paisley. Bark. You heard her bark. Yeah, I know. Okay.
I just had a quick question in
Okay.
regard to my quiz.
Okay.
Once I called the McGraw-Hill
Yeah.
customer service or IT, if there's something wrong, like, will I be able to finish the I think it was the last 6 questions that were all the drag ones that I took the videos of.
You know what? Jennifer, give me 1 second. I'm just gonna look at what your grade was already.
It was terrible.
It was terrible?
I think so.
Let me look.
Because it submitted I had to hit submit because it's timed. I had like 27
Oh.
minutes left, but the last 6 questions weren't I wasn't able to answer.
Oh. I'm gonna stop recording.
Oh, sorry.
Well, no, it's